Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are across the globe. Welcome to the CPath webinar, presenting CPath in Europe, moving global regulatory science forward. This time I want to remind you that the webinar is being recorded, and I'd like to introduce you to Kristen Swingle.
Welcome everyone. My name is Kristen Swingle, and I am Chief Operating Officer and Interim President of CPath Institute. It's our deep honor and delight to gather with everyone here today. Thank you for joining us as we share more about how our mission, our global partnerships, many of which you will hear about today during our panel session, and how our work is closely aligning with ongoing efforts in Europe, including the EMA Regulatory Science Strategy to 2025. Before we start, I want to especially acknowledge and thank the CPath team, our panelists, and the European community for their tremendous support in solidifying this key milestone for CPath. Thank you. As a word of general introduction, CPath Institute is a nonprofit organization established in the United States in 2005. While we have joined today to share more with you about our intended efforts for our newly launched nonprofit entity in the Netherlands, it's worth noting that with a salute to our past leadership, that over our tenure, CPath had established a footprint in London and currently has a subsidiary in Dublin. Since our inception, CPath has become a recognized leader in global regulatory science by leading innovation through collaboration. We provide an open, pre-competitive forum in which academic leaders, regulators, patient groups, and industry leaders work, share, and learn side by side to develop patient-centric solutions for unmet medical needs. By working together, CPath has established its greatest advantage in moving regulatory science forward, serving as a neutral convener. Our success is imperative upon extensive early stage planning and analysis, clearly articulated regulatory objectives, and optimized shared expertise. The launch of our nonprofit in Amsterdam supports our mission to accelerate the path to a healthier world and fortifies our goal to develop solutions that facilitate the development of safe and effective therapies for patients around the world. Next slide, please. All right, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to take the opportunity to share a little bit about our team. I have the unique pleasure of working with many richly experienced and dedicated professionals at CPath. I would like to take the opportunity to thank our board chairman, Wainwright Fishburne Jr., and the US and Netherlands board member, Dr. Thomas Salmonson, for working closely with the CPath executive team and European leadership, specifically Ms. Cécile Olivier, as we established our EU nonprofit entity. The CPath executive team is comprised of me, Klaus Romero, our Chief Science Officer, whom you'll hear from shortly, Jeffrey Barrett, our Senior Vice President for our Rare Disease Cures Accelerator Data and Analytics platform, Stephen Joel Coons, Senior Vice President of our Clinical Outcome Assessment Program, Richard Liskey, our Chief Technology Officer, Kevin Perkins, our Chief Financial Officer, and Sudhir Sivakamaran, our Vice President for Neuroscience. Both Dr. Thomas Salmonson and Kevin Perkins also serve on the board of directors for our nonprofit in the Netherlands, along with Cécile Olivier, and in turn work closely with our colleagues in the Dublin office, Graham Higson and Patrick O'Meara. This team works tirelessly on a variety of initiatives, several of which we will share with you during this webinar. And I would like to thank them for their hard work in making CPath a success. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Thomas Salmonson to say a few words.
Thanks, Kristen, and good afternoon from my side as well. And thank you for joining this, what I believe is a very important meeting. As you all know, advances in science results in new interesting drugs being developed currently. Drugs that target unmet needs and severe diseases, drugs that provide promise of not only symptomatic relief, but actually slowing down the disease progression, or perhaps even in some cases cure. So that's not a new thing, but that's a very helpful result of scientific advantage. But these new drugs, they actually challenge our traditional way of documenting, establishing efficacy and safety. if I put it a bit to the edge, maybe the old way of doing things, the randomized controlled trials, were better fitted for a rapid onset symptomatic effect in common diseases than the modern new drugs that we see that actually provide greater promise to the patient society. So we need to establish new methods to really understand the value of these new products. And I think we see that already within the orphan space. We've seen it in childhood diseases and oncology. We see that the need to understand the long-term effect of these drugs. But it's not only in rare diseases, it is actually in more common diseases as well. These new methods that we talk about, they often come with interesting, fancy names or acronyms. We talk about real-world data, MIDD, synthetic control groups, complex trial designs, etc. But for all of us that are involved in drug development and drug assessment, it actually comes down to a much more greater detail to need to utilize these tools and to understand them. What do we really mean by all this? How do we do it in practice? And will the outcome be accepted by regulators? Regulators, as we know, have developed important structure for benefit risk decisions where they include the uncertainties that they accept. So it's not a novelty for regulators to recognize uncertainties in drug development, but we need to embrace these models in detail and the new tools available. I know that you accuse me of being biased, but I think the European regulatory strategy is a helpful document, but I view it more as a menu rather than a cookbook. It doesn't really tell us how we need to do it. So it raises this essential question: how do we bring things forward? Clearly, we're not doing it at the pace that we all want it to be done. And if we learn from experience, I think it's safe to say that no individual stakeholder, no individual company can move this forward. We really need to do this together. The Critical Path Institute has a track record of providing such a framework for different stakeholders jointly with the CPath to bring things forward. And as you soon will hear, CPath have already been quite active in Europe through IMI, through qualification opinions. But I think it's fair to say that in the past, and I hope I'm not defending anyone, that the focus of CPath has been very much US and the FDA. Well, that changes today, and that's really important. Today, CPath is truly expanding its operations in Europe, and by doing so also globally. This is truly good news for anyone that is involved in drug development and assessment of drugs. So within the CPath, we're looking forward to work with all the European stakeholders to ensure that the new drugs that we develop reaches its full potential when it comes to provide support to our patients. Thank you very much, and I leave the floor to Klaus, I believe.
Yes, thanks, Thomas, and thanks everybody for joining. This is a milestone for us. And so, as Thomas was saying, there is clearly a need for collaboration to truly transform and accelerate medical product development. And that's what CPath can bring to the table. If you want to summarize what is it that we do, you can think of us as an organization that generates the legal infrastructure, the scientific infrastructure, and the regulatory infrastructure to be able to generate a truly neutral environment that becomes a safe place for industry, regulatory and government organizations, academia, and the patients to come together to this neutral environment, this unique neutral environment that we provide, and share information that they would not be able to share otherwise. And then we take that information, which typically takes the form of patient-level data from clinical trials from industry, registries from patients, and observational studies from academia, but it's not just limited to that. And we transform those data into actionable insights and solutions that can be applied surgically to solve very specific bottlenecks in the medical product development process. But let me insist on one thing. We provide the neutral environment, but if nobody comes, nothing happens. And so let's go to the next slide. This is the type of collaborations and collaborators that we bring together in our neutral environment. And this is a testament to the types of collaborations that we have with academic organizations, not just in the United States or Europe, and the European footprint of academic collaborations is growing, but globally. Of course, industry is at the center of this, but also the regulatory agencies. And not only FDA, EMA has been a major stakeholder for us since our very inception. But now that we have a full nonprofit structure within the European Union, we hope that this will accelerate our participation in contributing to solving very specific bottlenecks and needs in the European and global context. Let's go to the next one. And these collaborations get turned into real, tangible public-private partnerships. And this is just the latest count of all the active programs, consortia, and public-private partnerships that we have. There are some that are disease-specific, but solution-agnostic. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, type 1 diabetes. There are others that are solution-specific, but disease-agnostic, like the PRO consortium, the ECOA consortium. And there are others that are both disease-agnostic and solution-agnostic, like the Rare Disease Cures Accelerator Data and Analytics Platform. And we bring the core competencies that we have built over the years to ensure that each one of these programs delivers the kinds of solutions that are needed to address unmet needs in the medical product development process. Let's go to the next one. Excellent. We talked about the need for information and how that information typically takes the form of patient-level data. This is our progress in our ability to integrate patient-level data across clinical trials from industry, observational studies from academia, patient registries, but importantly, and that's the big jump you see as of the last couple of weeks, electronic health records. And we have just above 300,000 neonates represented across electronic health records, with major contributions from not just the United States, but also, importantly, the European continent. And there's a big contribution from electronic health records from the United Kingdom, and we're looking to continue to grow that. This is pretty unique, and the ability that we have to integrate all those multiple types of data sources together so that we can leverage the power of each precious data point to generate actionable solutions that can accelerate medical product development. Let's go to the next one. You heard me talk about our core competencies and what we have built so that we can transform the data and the information into actionable insights. The 5 core competencies that you see on the slides are represented either alone or in combination in every single one of the solutions that we have generated. But we also have concentration areas that provide the avenue for the core competencies to act and turn those pieces of information into insights. And those concentration areas are very flexible and adaptable to the evolving reality of medical product development. But every single one of our solutions, let me insist on that, is an expression of one or multiple core competencies that we have built over the years. Let's go to the next one. How do we make things happen from the standpoint of actually funding these efforts? And so In simple terms, there are three ways through which we fund each one of our public-private partnerships. The first example is through a single or multiple grants that support a public-private partnership. The other example is only through fees from the members that join one of our public-private partnerships that provide the financial support to get the work done, or a hybrid between a single grant or multiple grants and fees from members. Importantly, one of the things that we do is make sure that we understand the unmet needs and that we move them forward with a sustainability component in mind. You will remember that we have public-private partnerships that have been in existence for more than 10 years. It's not just because they exist because of the sake of existing. It's because they have evolved and they have tackled unmet needs, they have provided the solutions, and then more unmet needs are identified and more solutions are generated. And there are other efforts that after achieving its objective, they have been closed gracefully so that we move on to another area where there are unmet needs. So we are very cognizant of the aspects of sustainability, but also that sustainability needs to be connected with impact. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so now we have a full nonprofit structure in the European Union, but it's not like this is the first time we're having activities in the European continent. In fact, since our very inception, every single solution that we have generated, we have not only presented to the FDA for formal review and potential endorsement, but also to EMA for formal review and potential endorsement. And that has been successful, but this is going to move into a turbocharged scenario where we're going to leverage the shifting and the partnerships that we're building in the European continent, starting in the EU, but not just limited to EU members, to make sure that we deliver and we use our core competencies to address specific unmet needs in medical product development in the European context. So with that, I'll conclude this section and I'll pass it on to Cecile.
Thank you, Klaus, and everyone for this excellent presentation and introduction of CPath. And it is my pleasure to introduce to the audience today how do we believe that the entity in Amsterdam, the nonprofit entity, can facilitate the alignment between CPath activities and the EMA regulatory science strategy. The mission of the nonprofit entity in Amsterdam is truly to aim at developing and facilitating global collaboration and, if at all possible, global harmonization on DDTs by leveraging and developing CPath activities in EUS and existing and future activities in Europe in a complementary operational setting. We are aiming at strengthening CPath relationship with EMA and EU member state. As mentioned by Klaus, there is a history of interaction with the EU regulatory system already at CPath, and we really would like to take it to the next level in order to strengthen the tools that CPath is developing. We are also working towards facilitating and developing collaboration and strategic partnership with European key stakeholders involved in the field of drug development tool, data management and standards, as well as regulatory science in therapeutic areas that CPath are already active. And as you can see, it is really something that we can aim at with CPath, because on both sides of the ocean, we are already working with industry partners, and those of you from the industry side knows how much the industry is working already in global setting and collaboration. We have academic experts from both sides of the ocean, as well as input from regulators from both sides of the ocean, but also other regions that I would like to highlight. And we have likewise patient groups and non-profit members that are involved in our activities. So we are aiming at facilitating this global collaboration by developing CPath's unique operational model. And if we are moving to the next slide, the CPath operate on three main steps on how do they develop and maintain their consortium. The first step is about developing unmet needs or reason scanning, and how do we identify these unmet needs in existing activities or existing through the existing network and members of CPath, whatever this is coming from regulators, research institute and academia, patient organization or industry members, and how these unmet needs are being identified. It is, once these unmet needs have been identified, it is being discussed whether the public-private partnership is the right setting to address the challenges, and how could we overcome some of the hurdles identified. Sometimes PPP might not be the right answer, and it's important to understand that. But if PPP can definitely address these needs, then we are moving to the next phase, which is the pre-PPP assessment, where there is a very thorough work that is invested that can last between 12 to 18 months in some cases, where the scope of the project is being agreed, the work plan, the partners, the governance, as well as funding strategy, and also how to develop regulatory and data strategy. It is also important to agree on what is going to be CPath's role and responsibilities. And here I would like to highlight that when a consortium is being created on a CPath platform, then the founder or initiator of this unmet need identification can remain in the lead of the agenda and the strategy that they'd like to see being achieved within their respective community. At this stage, we are also starting to build up resources and learn how to work together in this multi-stakeholder setting. Then another decision point is made in order to truly validate the operational model of a consortium to move ahead and moving into an execution phase where annual work plan take place in most of the consortia, in all the consortium, with also monthly call with governance and other members involved, including regulatory participation. And from there, solution generation, data integration and regulatory submissions are being developed and submitted to the authorities, as well as annual workshop, discussion around topic prioritization, but also sustainability are being discussed. The impact of such an operational model truly can help in Europe to identify how can we synergize existing activities and leverage what already exists to the benefit of the EU community, and in line with the EMA regulatory science strategy, which has been adopted by all stakeholders in Europe. Sometimes not necessarily public-private partnership has to be launched in the initial stage, but to co-host webinar and workshop with EMA or member state or other stakeholders in Europe in order to truly identify what are the needs at regional level are going to be important, as well as the possibility on education and trainings. Then the impact of moving into the pre-PPP assessment phase really allow to start building a regional position, moving beyond individual capacity or individual expert views that are being shared in the consortium. And with this, that allow to ensure that the EU goals are truly integrated in a global strategy, and facilitate to have resources being optimized and efficient with a clear focus and role and responsibilities established. And then moving on to the operational phase, thank you. The impact of having consortium being set up in such a robust way with operational excellence allow to ensure that at regional level we can have DDTs or drug development tools that are fit for EU purposes and answer the requirements of the regional or expectation at regional level. We can truly discuss in a neutral way global data strategy, as well as sharing knowledge and learning with the EU networks and also learnings across region in order to avoid duplication of efforts and resources. Thank you. Next slide, please. Yeah. So today we have selected from CPath's existing consortia activities that we believe can help illustrate already existing synergies that are in line with the EMA regulatory science strategy, and there are 5 goals. And we would like to start by the first goal. Next slide, please. Which is about catalyzing the integration of science and technology in medicines and development. And Klaus will share with us regulatory successes in this domain from CPath. Thank you.
Yeah, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so what is the point, right? So we want the solutions to be adopted. If we generate solutions and nobody adopts them, those are not solutions. And the regulatory review and endorsement mechanisms that the different regulatory agencies have are a conduit to generate that confidence so that the solutions are adopted. And those solutions are the ones that are responsible for retransforming those paradigms in medical product development. With FDA, we started with the first ever qualification decision for 7 safety kidney biomarkers. But importantly, we have 4 qualifications for clinical outcome assessment instruments that have truly transformed the notion of patient-centric drug development in diseases of clear need for patients. We have letters of support for multiple biomarkers, but we also have the first ever clinical trial simulator as the first ever quantitative drug development solution to be endorsed by FDA. But if you look at the count, we have even more positive regulatory milestones with EMA. And I want to focus on those a little bit, especially the example of the qualification of a translational tool for tuberculosis, the hollow fiber system. That really helped transform tuberculosis, leading up to the first new drug to be approved in 50 years for that disease. That represents major transformation. Also, the first ever imaging biomarker to be qualified for a rare disease, an orphan condition, and polycystic kidney disease. That also led to transformation in drug development in that space, and the first drug to be specifically approved to change the course of the disease there. But we're global, and we are also working with our Japanese colleagues, and we have 1 qualification decision for safety biomarkers. But the point here is, sure, those regulatory milestones are fantastic, but how do they translate the impact that they have had in truly transforming drug development in areas of unmet need, and how now the nonprofit setup in Europe is going to help us really get embedded into addressing unmet needs in the European context. With that, I'll pass it back on to Cecile.
Thank you, Klaus. And now moving on to the goal 2 of the EMA regulatory science strategy around driving collaborative evidence generation and improving the scientific quality of evaluation. We have selected 2 cases that address many of these objectives. One which is around the Duchenne Regulatory Science Consortium and how they built tools over the years, as well as the development of novel digital measure in Parkinson's disease. And I will leave the floor to Terina. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecile. Next slide, please. What we'll talk about now is some tangible examples of patient-centric drug development tools in rare disease by highlighting some key initiatives within the Duchenne Regulatory Science Consortium. First, I want to talk for a brief moment about some progression models and clinical trial simulation tools for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which I'll abbreviate DMD. These are data and quantitative model-based drug development approaches for a clinical trial simulation platform. We also have a key initiative focused on qualification of glutamate dehydrogenase, or GLDH, as a safety biomarker for DMD clinical trials. This is a really key marker that is useful for detecting drug-induced hepatic cytotoxicity in individuals with underlying muscular disease. Another initiative that we have is the Master Protocol for Duchenne Adaptive Platform Trial. This is in partnership with Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy and the Institute for Advancing Clinical Trials in Children. This is a clinical trial, a complex clinical trial design that is really designed to increase efficiency of clinical trials and to reduce placebo controls. To come back to the impact and importance of the clinical trial simulation platform, this is the first ever comprehensive collection of models for 5 clinically meaningful outcome measures across the continuum of DMD. And this is already having an impact because the learnings from this platform have been leveraged by industry sponsors and trial design for new therapeutic candidates. This is an example of how we really integrate many of the core competencies within CPath to address the unique and urgent unmet needs within the rare disease space, because the challenges of enrolling and optimizing clinical trials in rare disease really do require a global and strategic approach with multiple partners. From here, I'll hand it off to my colleague, Martin Muller.
Thank you, Tarita. Hello, my name is Martin Muller, and I'm the Senior Scientific Director of the Critical Path for Parkinson's Consortium, and I'm one of the leads for the Digital Drug Development Tools Initiative, or 3DT for short. Thank you for the opportunity to provide a brief introduction to 3DT. So, a select group of CPP members launched the 3DT team in 2019. The impetus for the team was to enhance Parkinson's disease therapeutic development by incorporating digital health technologies in clinical trials as either exploratory or secondary outcome measures. The use of digital health technologies in clinical trials holds promise, but to date, their impact has been unfortunately limited. Some of the reasons might be that the digital field is still a relatively young scientific discipline, and there are many unknowns. That there is silent development that has delayed standardized measurement methodologies. But there are still questions and issues with data standards, provenance, privacy, and security that need to be addressed. And a lack of regulatory precedent for use of these measures beyond exploratory endpoints. The main focus of CPP's 3DT initiative is to leverage the unique role of CPath as a neutral convener to bring together stakeholders in a pre-competitive space in order to advance the regulatory maturity of digital health technologies. In that respect, CPath's legal, data, and regulatory core competencies, as Klaus laid out, provide an ideal platform to accomplish this goal. The pilot observational study protocol, which was called Watch PD study, serves as a case example for 3DT to further inform ongoing and future interventional Parkinson's disease studies that include digital health technologies. Following the recommendations that were laid out in the Framework for Success paper by authors from the EMA and others, we saw interaction with regulators early, and we had an innovation task force meeting with EMA in 2019. This ITF meeting was instrumental in providing invaluable feedback that set the agenda for the next phases of 3DT. Considerable progress has been made in addressing the gaps that were identified by the EMA and that may pose barriers in the field, such as harmonization, privacy, and patient engagement, just to name a few. This has led to several key publications, including a recent paper in the journal Sensors that presents a framework for reporting metadata in clinical research that utilizes digital health technologies. The long-term vision of 3DT is to achieve endorsement from global regulatory agencies to adopt the use of digital health technologies as drug development tools for decision-making in Parkinson's disease trials that target the early manifest stages of the disease. In line with the second goal of the regulatory science strategy, tackling challenges collectively by advancing data-driven solutions, sharing costs and risks, as well as embracing open science will be a true catalyst to accelerate the adoption and regulatory acceptance of digital health technologies and their use in clinical trials. 3DT's pre-competitive collaboration for sharing knowledge and data under the advisement of the EMA and health authorities worldwide will have parallel impact on other disease areas and is key in reaching success. And with that, we're looking forward to continuing our engagement with the EMA on the 3DT project. Thank you very much, and I'll hand it back to Cecile.
Thank you, Martijn and Terina, for sharing these very important cases that, as you mentioned, are setting up regulatory precedents that can be leveraged in other areas. And now moving on to also a topic that is very close to CPath's heart, which is about advancing patient-centered access to medicine in partnership with healthcare system. And here we have also selected two very good cases, one of them involving digital tools, as well as another case using developing data analytic platforms. And with this, I'll give the floor to our colleague Scotty. Thank you, Scotty, you have the floor.
Thanks so much, Cecile. Hi, everyone. My name is Scotty Kern. I serve as the Executive Director of the Electronic Clinical Outcome Assessment Consortium, the ECOA Consortium, which is one of 3 consortia which form the COA program at CPath. As you could probably pick up from my accent, I kind of represent a slightly more local presence to our European colleagues. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to introduce this project today. I'm actually speaking on behalf of our sister consortium, the PRO Consortium, who are leading a project in chronic heart failure, as the slide illustrates here, which ostensibly aims to achieve a formal qualification of a novel COA measure via the FDA's COA qualification program. But in the context of the webinar today, more broadly, this is an example of a project whose very foundation rests on the pivotal need to place patients, the patient experience, the patient voice at the center of drug development. So to give a little more sort of detail on what the project, the CHF project, as we're terming it, intends to do, it's trying to identify a novel endpoint measure based on accelerometry data that we obtain from activity monitors, principally risk-based, but are looking at other opportunities as well, that will be used to assess treatment effects in CHF trials. So a working group was formed by the PRO Consortium of sponsor entities and FDA, and they benefited from the donation of data from one of the collaborating sponsors. And that working group formed a goal for the project that specifically was to identify those metrics that could be used to derive efficacy endpoints that adequately reflect what patients with chronic heart failure told us were meaningful to them in terms of their everyday daily activity, daily physical activity. So how are we doing that? Step 1 was the conduct of concept elicitation interviews, where the patients told us what they considered most important in terms of daily activities. So examples being in terms of light to moderate physical activity, cleaning, gardening, and those based on walking, so shopping or exercise if they're indeed able to do so. And what that allowed us to do, or the working group to do, was to identify the most appropriate dimensions to characterize those activities, such as intensity, as those were necessary in order to link to what ultimately would be proposed as metrics, as the whole basis of the project. So to identify those potential metrics, an advisory panel of experts was formed that has met twice. The second meeting was only a few weeks ago. Utilizing all that evidence that we have from data, from literature reviews and other research that the working group in CPath did an awful lot of work there, I can certainly testify, came up with 2 candidate metrics, and namely step counts, looking at that walking aspect, and activity counts from that sort of more general activity perspective. The next step for the project is to continue with the task of drawing consensus and alignment over those metrics, testing them, challenging them, and what the implications of selection of those metrics might be. Amongst the sponsors that form the working group, CPath ourselves and FDA, and really to progress with that overall qualification effort. Now, this project, as Cecile noted, has been framed in the context of patient-centric drug development, but arguably this project is very much in scope with EMA's goal 2, and specifically the need to exploit digital technologies. And as you can tell from this brief introduction, that's very much central to what this project is trying to do. And the whole concept of digital technology, digital health technologies, digital measurement, digital measures in general, is an area of very substantial energy within certainly the ECOA consortium, the PRO consortium, and as Martijn illustrated a moment ago, other CPath consortia as well. I think specifically in the context of this discussion, this project is a really good example of how CPath has developed the capability to explore novel approaches, novel methodologies, if you will, for development of COAs. And we do that through collaboration. As Klaus said at the very beginning, we kind of exist to collaborate. We need to share our outputs. We need to share our learnings, whether they are positive or otherwise. And in the context of digital technologies in particular, we, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of many other of our CPath companion consortia, that we look forward to continuing to explore new opportunities and innovations in this field, and most importantly, in a global context. Now with that, I'm going to pass on to my colleague Jeff to talk about RDC8 DAT. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm head of the RDC DAT program here at CPath. This is a platform that has been launched in September of last year, so this is not vaporware. It's up and running, and this is a place where, you know, we can look at the cliche, if you build it, they will come. Well, it's already built. And I think one of the things that we're hoping to showcase here in this endeavor is that we have a number of examples where just by having access to the platform, researchers around the world have come in, gotten access, and it's not just a home for data that people can take a look at and do their own thing. This is a platform by which collaborative research and development happens in a seamless manner. It was generously started from a grant from the FDA, but clearly there's intention for this to be a global resource, and early efforts have also allowed us to make progress on Prader-Willi disease and a number of other rare diseases. This is not a consortium as its own right. It is a project that links with other consortiums. So you saw some of the examples that Tarina and Martin had talked about. The future of a more modern and sophisticated information technology that accumulates data, but also provides a resource by which clinical questions can be sought out and collaborated on together, is possible with this platform. And it's a platform that continues to grow and evolve. And I would say, as it is open for business now, one of the big components of what we hope is that this platform will be participated on with the global ecosystem in mind. It's clearly intended to be something that is a resource for the entire rare disease ecosystem. Some of the work, exciting work that's happening, particularly in Friedreich's ataxia, is that we're looking very critically at some of the historical scales that have been used to judge previous clinical trials, and looking to further expand this and draw the stakeholders into collaborations to ask very candid and detailed questions about whether or not we have accurately assessed a disease phenotype that's credible and can be used by regulatory authorities around the world to make good clinical decisions? Can this be a relevant place to start discussions around endpoints, surrogate markers, reasonable biomarkers? So it's a mechanism to promote the science and something that we're looking to expand. Those who come and pressure test this and give us recommendations on how to further expand the functionality will have a resource that suits their needs. So we're very responsive to the needs of a global rare disease ecosystem. And I think this is something that we're looking for participation on a broad scale. So I'd be happy to go into details, but this platform is up and running. The website is full with lots of information on how to get access to the platform. We're clearly looking for this to be a global resource and one that will grow and expand with additional functionality over the years. With that, I'll turn it back to Cecile.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Scotty, for sharing these two projects, very important, and also creating precedents. There is a lot of interest into having a data analytics platform in different regions, and there, I think, again, collaboration, interoperability is going to be key to achieve these goals at global level. Now moving on to the goal 4, which is very important as well, and about addressing emerging health threats and availability, as well as therapeutic challenges. Another topic that has been really developing fast and very well in the past years is the topic of repurposing. And here Marco is going to present the work he's been doing over the past years. Thank you, Marco.
Thank you, Cecile. My name is Marco Schito. I'm the Executive Director of the Cure Drug Repurposing Collaboratory. This is a dedicated public-private partnership designed to globally capture real-world clinical outcome data to advance drug repurposing and inform clinical trials for diseases of high unmet need. We work in a number of different therapeutic areas of high unmet need, but where there's actually very little interest from industry. And this oftentimes occurs in things in areas like infectious diseases such as AMR, neglected tropical diseases, re-emerging infections. We also work with special populations, including neonates, especially pregnant women. Rare oncology is an area that we're really getting more interested in moving forward with, as well as rare diseases in general. Now, CDRC collaborates with a diverse set of global partners through a multi-staged approach, which I've outlined here at the top. In stage 0, we really define and prioritize diseases by assessing the level of unmet clinical need, the amount of drug repurposing that's occurring, and whether there is or isn't new drug development. We also engage with scientists to evaluate preclinical signals using a variety of tools such as high-throughput assays, a number of omic technologies, and really starting to look at more at AI mining technologies as well. That leads to stage 1, which is where we're really interested in capturing real-world data from a variety of sources. And this includes clinician-submitted reports using the CureID app, which we're partnering with FDA and NIH. And here in the US. But again, this is a global platform. We would like to engage with a number of different groups, and we have started projects outside of the US, including in India, and exploring areas in not only in Europe, but in the African continent and in South America as well. We have recently secured funding to expand this initiative to develop a tool that automates the extraction of defined data elements from different electronic health records, and then standardizing it to a common data model, such as OMAP. We can then run analytics through a predefined bioinformatic or informatic pipeline to evaluate data in real time. And the purpose of this is really to generate hypotheses of what drugs can be used that could be efficacious for those particular treatments that have no treatment efficacy right at the moment. This then leads to stage 2, where we plan to inform and partner with clinical trialists to confirm the hypothesis by standing up the infrastructure for conducting research. And we're really interested in embedding these research protocols in clinical practice so that it becomes a decentralized trial infrastructure. But this would still involve adaptive platform trials with master protocols. They are designed to answer a question. But this evidence generation would not only be used to inform clinical practice, which is what we intend to do after the clinical trial, which is in stage 3, but depending really on the disease and the drug scenario, may also be used to advance regulatory approvals in stage 4. So the ultimate goal here is really to maximize the use of existing medications that we have within our armamentarium on a global level. As you know, there are multiple challenges to advance these drugs through this framework. Oftentimes, there's no financial incentives for pharma companies or especially generic manufacturers to expand their label. And there are changes to the drug label that would need to be initiated by the drug sponsor or RLD holder rather than anyone else. And on top of that, there are a number of different IP and patent issues that prevent and provide impetus for groups to move forward with. And these are just a few examples. But really, to address these concerns, I think we need to be able to partner with multiple stakeholders on a global level. Diseases do not recognize international boundaries, as we all know. There's travel, there's consequently lots of transmission that can occur quickly and rapidly. I think the past few years have shown that to be the case. And we need to adapt to the changing landscape so that we can be better prepared for not only this current pandemic, but future pandemics as well. We need to think about new incentives, new regulatory pathways, and to partner to harmonize policy changes that are being adopted by different regulatory authorities. We have recently initiated a working group with participants from regulatory agencies from the UK, Slovenia, Spain, Australia, Canada, and the US, together with academics and nonprofit organizations to be able to address some of these issues. But I'll stop here, and if there are other questions, I'd be happy to address those at a later time. And it's back to you, Cecile.
Thank you, Marco, for presenting your activities and your engagement and commitment to reach out to the global community as well. You had a fantastic annual workshop last year, and feel free to reach out to Marco. And so moving on to the last goal, which is close to the heart of many of the panelists I know, and to CPath as well, which is about enabling and leveraging research and innovation in regulatory science. And here we will have Jeff and Hong presenting of example of collaboration and work that is being done in terms of education and training, and then we'll take it back from there. Thank you. Jeff, you have the floor.
A big component of what CPath seeks to do, though, is also to communicate to a very expanded and growing requests from translational scientists across different environments, including regulatory science in particular. One of the milestone efforts that we recently launched was in the completion of a model-informed drug development training series. This is a curriculum created by a very diverse group of stakeholders representing industry, academia, the CRO industries, nonprofits, who have come together and put forward, quite a bit of video and digital content around training scientists on the concept of model-informed drug development. This has been and continues to be a strong investment from both regulatory authorities around the world, and a place where having comfort level from a multidisciplinary team really around the approach, the methodologies that they may come into play when they see submissions coming from industry sponsors or from an academic researchers. It's a matter of giving a context and familiarity. So what we have done is created a learning management system where a lot of these resources have been accumulated, and an additional curriculum has been put together and is now available. This is currently being benchmarked by the US FDA at the moment. The intention is to make this available really around the world and to be a resource for an extended group of stakeholders. It's been focused on regulatory scientists, but clearly there's an intention to expand this. We recently presented this at the World Conference on Pharmacometrics just a month ago. And I think there's good feedback, there's good investment. Others want to contribute to this. We already have 28 hours of video content with a lot of examples, a lot of specific guidance on how to interpret some of the didactic materials that's provided. The other intention is to provide what would be office hours that our scientists, in collaboration with scientists who contributed the material, would be available to answer questions and to further refine the materials upon the interaction with those who are taking the curriculum. It's clearly a place where we expect this environment to grow and to continue to evolve as some of these complex areas such as digital health, the use and exploitation of real-world data and real-world evidence, as well as the new focus on artificial intelligence and machine learning to advance drug development becomes part of the expanded curriculum. There's already content in all of these areas so far, so it's an investment that's been made that we expect to grow, and clearly this is something that will benefit also from a global community involved in refining the material and making it as good as it needs to be. And with that, I'll pass it over to Hong.
Thank you, Jeff. Hi, everyone. My name is Hong Nguyen. I am the Director of Regulatory Science here at CPath. And I wanted to review a little bit of our collaboration with academic institutions. We currently have a regulatory science graduate certificate program with the University of Arizona, the College of Law. This is a strictly online program. It includes 9 courses total, and 3 of which are led by CPath scientists. And we cover basically the drug discovery and drug development life cycle from the initial discovery of a new molecular entity and on through into market and regulatory processes. We also have example case studies to give real world example in terms of current situations with drug development. And in line with that, we are also working with the Regulatory Intelligence Interest Group, which is head by researchers at University of Rochester. And Cecile and I are also currently in discussion with STARS, Strengthening Training of Academia in Regulatory Science, for their global conference coming up in May on a session titled Excellence in Regulatory Science. So that encompasses the training aspects that CPath is participating in terms of developing the next generation of scientists in regulatory science. With that, I hand back to Cecile.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Hong. I think the education and training component is absolutely key when new tools are being developed in order to gather feedback, refine, and train everyone or work with everyone on integrating these tools into the practice and make it accessible. Particularly the MIDD training as a non-modeler, I'm looking forward to learn from it, and I would highly recommend everyone to do such a training that is accessible to non-modelers. So now we have finished with the technical session, and I just would like to wrap up this part before moving into the panel, and just to say that this is just a few examples that we have selected to present today in order to illustrate some of the synergies and operational models that CPath has. As you will see, there isn't a one-size-fits-all, so I think it's important to understand for your respective communities or topic what would be the right setting to address unmet needs you have identified, and see how can we engage in collaborative efforts with the right stakeholders and the right setting to address these challenges in a timely manner. Before moving to the panel, I would like to acknowledge the regulatory science team at CPath, which has been absolutely amazing in putting together the webinar and coordinate all the different speakers and topics, as well as supporting the development of the EU expansion. And I really would like to take this minute to acknowledge you. Now I will give the floor to, then we move to the panel, if we could have, yes. And we have a really distinguished panel of experts today that will join us. We have 1 hour for discussion. I really would like to encourage everyone to ask us everything you never dare to ask to CPath, and to answer the question you have. As experts, we have Ralph Herold, Dr. Ralph Herold from the European Medicine Agency Task Force Regulatory Science and Innovation Team, and who is serving as a Senior Scientific Officer. We have Dr. Ladad Lyons, who is Global Regulatory Lead in the Clinical Trial Innovation and Digital Health team at Roche, and also is a former regulator from EMA and Swissmedic. We have Dimitrios Athanasiou, who is PDCO member at the European Medicine Agency and is a very engaged advocate for patient representative across the board in Europe and beyond Europe, and is part of the EuroOrdis board, member in World Duchenne Organization, as well as the European Patient Forum and the Greek Patient Association. And finally, we have Professor Franz Koenig, who is a biostatistician at Medical University of Vienna, and also have some regulatory experience from the EMA, and can help us share the perspective from academia. And we will have the panel joined by Klaus Romero. Dr. Romero is Chief Science Officer at CPath, and we'll have the honor and pleasure to have the panel moderated by Dr. Thomas Salmonson, who many of you know as former chair of the CHMP at EMA, and is also in the board of director in the US at CPath, as well as the board of director of CPath Netherlands. And Thomas, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecile. And let me first just thank CPath colleagues for sharing very nice examples, and they're truly just examples of all the work that CPath is doing, it just illustrates the importance, and you now understand why I decided to join the organization. As Cecile said, we will have a panel discussion, and this, of course, I prepared a couple of questions for the panel, but we should also take questions, if possible, from you. And you can share your questions, and they would either be answered in writing, as you've seen, some have already been answered, or they will be brought to me, and we will try to bring them to the panel. And you understand this rather technical, and I'm sure I'm going to mess it all up. So don't worry, it's going to be complicated and confusing, but hopefully it will be entertaining and informative. So I'll watch my screens for questions, and let me just start with the few questions I had to the panel. And let's just get the starting point right here. We all understand that we need to develop the methodology. We all understand that we need to find new sources of information. There's been a discussion for a long time about real-world data, adaptive design, digital health, you name it. Yet the progress when it comes to how drugs are actually developed has been relatively slow, despite these discussions, despite these academic advantages, despite it. So why is it? What's needed to really bring these new technologies to the drug development forefront and use them to truly understand the true value of our new drugs? And I'm going to ask each panelist this question. I'm starting with Franz from a more academic perspective. How do you see the bottlenecks here? What is hindering us to get the full potential of the tools that the academic is developing? Franz? Cecile, have I already messed up the system?
No, we need to connect France. Maybe while France.
Okay,
I'm connected.
I can move
Can you
on.
hear me?
Yeah, well done, France. Thank you.
I had to close Microsoft Teams in parallel. It didn't work with the microphone. Sorry. Good. So thanks, Thomas, for the introduction, and really congratulations for the CPath team for having opened now an office in Europe. And coming back to your question, so as far as European projects funded like by the IMI or IHI now, industry partners already operate internationally and also use the international networks quite very nicely. And we have experienced it successfully in recent projects like in EU Pearl, which is on platform trials, that industry also contributes substantially with people being located in US. But due to the funding schemes, academia networks are sometimes built around geographical restrictions the funding comes from, and not solely on scientific excellence. But as over the years, the topics have become more and more internationally. Think of the work on adaptive designs, like just mentioned by Thomas, extrapolation or master protocols. It would be good not only to align regulators and industry across the Atlantic, but also academia from the very beginning. As usual, academia is one of the driving forces in developing new methodologies. There is collaboration among academia in US and Europe, but rather on a small scale and rather on a personal level, but not usually in joint large US and EU funded project. And here CPath can really play a crucial role in the upcoming years. For example, to have an impact on the selection of topics and also on the timelines of calls that are really harmonized between funders in US and EU. And sometimes if one region starts funding a certain topic, it could take some time until others recognize the importance either and also allow for calls and funding. And here also the EMA and the FDE initiatives to enhance regulatory science topics will play a crucial role to speed up the process in the upcoming years. And even if joint funding might be difficult, having projects tackling similar problems at the same time could be very valuable. And again, CPath could play an important role. For example, connecting the project in the different regions in a better way, especially if CPath is now a member of the project in both US and Europe, and also to ensure a constant knowledge transfer between the project. And it would be very appreciated if CPath could take a leading role in connecting not only industry, but also academic partners. For example, there have been several projects on adaptive designs or trial designs on small population in both US and Europe over the last decades. And it sometimes takes years or even decades until such global efforts also feed into joint regulatory guidelines. For example, takes a recent ICH initiative to have a joint guideline on adaptive designs. And from the early days in the late 80s, it took almost 30 years to have a joint discussion on a global level. And unfortunately, academia is not involved as a full stakeholder in the ICH process. And I think here also CPath could have a critical role in getting academia better involved, not only being a key driver in the very beginning, but also in the end of the line. And some processes in drug development have been established now for many years and decades. And Thomas might agree, consistency seems to be a very important principle for regulators. However, involving externals from academia could really help to critically appraise the current standards and, if needed, shake the foundation. For example, with this discussion of adaptive designs, the phases of drug development began to blur and seamless studies are now accepted in some circumstances. Also, which frameworks on how to define the level of evidence needed for drug licensing in which area should be formalized in a better way. Think of the 2 pivotal trial rules, or which level is really needed for a single pivotal trial, or which level of evidence is really needed when we extrapolate from adults to children. So thanks, Thomas.
Thanks, Franz. And I think you make a very interesting point here. The link between general work done, for example, at the global level through ICH, and the role that CPath may have in implementing and breaking this down into practical use. I think that's really good. If I can move to you, Lada, with your regulatory industry background, and I'm sure your high management has seen the noise around real world data and digital, and they're all thrilled. But from your perspective, in your day-to-day work, designing trials, etc., what are the obstacles from an industry perspective?
Thank you, Thomas. So one thing that we see clearly is it takes a village, or better said, a city, to develop, validate these tools, right? So we shouldn't do it alone as industry, single companies. We should really work together to collaborate, not only between industry, but also, as Fran said, with other stakeholders like academia, patient organizations, and others. So we need a strong collaboration platform that in Europe can complement the existing platforms such as IHI and facilitate that collaboration for the development of those tools. And it's not only the development, it's also the validation, it's the qualification. Another aspect that is really important is to get the acceptance from the scientific community, right? We can develop and validate these tools, but we then need as well, not only the single companies that have been in the partnership or stakeholders to use it, we need the broader scientific community to use it. So CPath can there also provide a common neutral platform for multi-stakeholder dialogue to work towards that scientific acceptance. And that gap of having a neutral platform was actually raised last year at a workshop that was organized by FPA on complex clinical trials. There was a clear call for having such a neutral platform that enables this multi-stakeholder dialogue. It's also listed in the Act.eu as one of the priorities for this year. So I think those are some of the key aspects that could help advance the challenges. And last but not least, as well enabling harmonization between regulators and the dialogue between regulators. As CPath has a lot of experience now with EU and US qualification procedures, can we actually move towards more harmonized acceptance of these tools, always understanding the nuances of the legal and regulatory frameworks in the different regions? So I'm not calling for harmonization, ignoring those nuances. Of course, we need to take them into consideration, and CPath can play that, also that forum for those policy discussions with regulators. And I think that's how you can really help to advance this field, Thomas.
Thanks a lot. No, really clear. Dimitrios, during the presentations, Duchenne was mentioned, and I know that's very close to your heart, and you're well aware of the development. And in that disease, there's actually been some interesting attempts to do long-term studies with external control groups and to study not only walking capacity, but upper limb function, lung function, etc. What's your perspective of what's needed and in terms of developing these methodologies, but also the data sources where we derive information from?
Thank you very much, Thomas. Maybe I should start by saying that in Duchenne, we like the things that work. And we appreciate CPath because it does work. And having said that, because we have our, let's say, US arm being very involved from the very early supporting the risk in CPath. And having said that, the data that it is there, and we try to use it for the drug development, is our children's data. And, you know, data in rare disease where we come from, it's scarce. It has a value and we cannot ignore it. But on the same time, and Thomas, I think we have seen these challenges, let's say, in the regulatory environment. These diseases, some of the diseases like Duchenne, they change by year. So the extrapolation, the disease progression models, without the disease progression models, you cannot actually have anything. Duchenne is a completely different animal before 5 years that we try to bring historical data to do trials, for example, than it is today. It extended life expectancy by 7 years in the last 10 years, only by care. So the use of data is important. The data sharing is also important. But maybe I would like to put it in a little higher level from our experience in Duchenne. And I echo what Lada said, you know, about policy. And maybe I want to provoke it a little more. We have one drug in US that it is approved in US and it's not approved in Europe, and vice versa, we have a drug approved in Europe and it's not approved in the US. This is unacceptable, period. And harmonization and the role of CPath as a neutral platform is critical. So we're definitely looking, let's say, to this systemic change. And if we're going a little more down to the ground level, the processes are also important, because I cannot imagine that we have 95% of our rare diseases have no treatment. Some of them, you have 2 people or 3 people in a million, how you can do trials in this. So I really want to call on Jeff efforts to that we need different models, different mechanisms, different data and analytics platforms to develop these drugs. And because we cannot, even CPath, we cannot have 7,000 pilots on 7,000 diseases. So wrapping up, I would say that we need CPath, and we have evidence that they can bring the change. We need CPath as a platform that connected to parts of the ocean and maybe more parts of this planet, because this is a global game. It's not a regional game anymore. And finally, we have to keep an eye on policy. Policy is important. Policy in Europe is important. So there are other animals inside Europe beyond EMA, beyond industry, beyond patients, and we have to keep them in the loop. And finally, this depthening of CPath in our region with better penetration, let's say, in the system, I think it will help us a lot. Thank you so much for your time.
But thanks, Dimitrios. That's good, and it's easy to understand as a patient representative and a father. I think it's very difficult to understand if a biomarker is accepted on one side of the big pool and not of the other. So that frustration is there and clear. Ralph, if I turn to you for your first comments and initial remarks, there's lots of initiatives from the EMA, and we see them coming, and they're very welcome. How do we take this to the next step and progress this forward even better? And of course, it's not only initiatives from EMA. We've even seen some national initiatives and the Danish data center, etc., etc. What's your view on the bottlenecks or preventing the full use of these new tools?
Thank you, Thomas, and colleagues. You already mentioned a number of topics that I won't repeat here, but I agree too much to what was said. But want to start to congratulate the CPath. I have to say this presentation is the most useful reminder, and I will reuse it clearly. The information about this is important. So this is already a huge achievement, and the bottlenecks will probably be always there, because our task is to chase the future in a way, to advance and to progress. And I can offer only some personal comments here. I work in the Task Force Regulatory Science and Innovation, which is a transversal structure that supports the therapeutic and specialized areas, really. And you could say that we have published the bottlenecks when we published these regulatory science research needs. That's a list of about 100 topics that we feel are open questions that need to be provided with a solution. And I think for many of these, the works are already ongoing, and solutions can come, and CPath will also be most welcome to contribute to that. And if we want to look at this 100 topics that are open, many might come to qualification procedures. So we need to be prepared maybe to have a 2-digit number soon of qualification. So there's also the efficiency that we need to talk about. Other bottlenecks that were mentioned are concerning the funding, that the funding is more efficient. I heard the need for coordination, and I think it's also now a unique situation that we can inform funding. The models by which funding calls are being written are changing, and therefore there's also a possibility to obtain more funding, and I hope that also the coordination between national and international level will improve. Others mention a number of bottlenecks, so let me just maybe emphasize one here that I want to check with you if that is also a bottleneck that you see. And this is that we need an even more intensified interdisciplinary approach. And I'm saying this because we regulators, we need to do that. We are trying to implement it with the new working party operating model where we have European specialized expert communities. But I think clearly that there needs to be more intensified interdisciplinary exchange between methodologists and clinicians, and maybe then also toxicologists and others. Apologies if I single out these two, clinical and methodologies, because I believe really that the topics that CPath is working on that allow us to progress require intensive interdisciplinary dialogue. I said this for the regulators, but I also see this at the other end, so to say, in clinical practice. We have been told by learned societies that they find it difficult to handle medicines that come with evidence from novel methodologies that are not following, let's say, conventional drug development approaches. And therefore, I think overall, we just need to have much more exposure, discussion, and focus on the methods, and not just on the focus of applying the methods and the results that support new medicines, but we somehow need to have more workshops, more sessions in congresses where really the methods are part of the discussion and how they can be iterated and improved with the next application and so on. And that's maybe just a bottleneck that this shifting of the framework of discussion could also be something we can jointly work on. Thanks, and over.
No, but that's really good, and I think all of you have illustrated that opposite to the path where we could have a sponsor, drug development, and a regulator, and possibly other stakeholders, we're now in a situation that to generate information around our new drugs, often many stakeholders need to be involved. And that include, of course, sponsor, regulators, but also academia, clinical, the healthcare system, etc., etc. So now, having heard all this, maybe I should go back to Cecile, Klaus, and perhaps even Terina around the Duchenne. Your reflections. If I start with you, Klaus, when you hear this one, on a high level, I'll come back and what the details later on, but how do you see CPath meeting these needs? And I know it's a broad, difficult question, but you can handle it.
Thanks, Tomas. That's what we do, right? So we tackle the problematic area. So yeah, happy to start with that conversation. So a couple of clarifications. The two biggest assets that we have at CPath is, first of all, our people, and second, our neutrality. And we protect that with every possible effort and energy that we have. And so in order to speak about the neutrality that we bring to the table, we don't get involved in any kind of conversations or reviews about single products. But what we do is make sure that we put everything on the table as part of our collaborations to ensure that the context of each regulatory environment is understood by every single stakeholder. We're not going to be forcing, and we have never forced one regulatory agency that needs to address things in a regional context or a continental context to adopt something that another regulatory agency is thinking based on their individual context and all of that. But what we do is put everything, like I said, on the table to make sure that the similarities are understood and the differences are understood. One thing that I will say that we have learned over the years is that once you peel off the layers that have to do with the specific context, we have seen that regulatory agencies are more in agreement than in disagreement about the fundamentals. Things like the clinical meaningfulness of the metrics, things about the regulatory evidentiary considerations for drug development tools and for products. It's just that the statutes and the context starts becoming important when understanding where a position is taken by one regulatory agency versus the other. And that's reality. And once we recognize that, we can work to ensure that we address those specific contexts in those conversations. Specifically about Duchenne, we're currently working on bridging both the efforts that we have very active in the United States with the efforts that have been ongoing for quite some time, and the interest is an embodiment of that in Europe. I'll call on Torina now to comment on how that is going, and then we can pass it on to others to comment as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Klaus. And yes, I'm happy to elaborate more. I think a great example of this is the clinical trial simulation platform that we're working on. This incorporates data and aggregates data from over 20 data sets, which of course is fundamental in the rare disease space to really increase the power. And it uses functional assessments to model progression. But importantly, the way that we're approaching this with the FDA and the EMA is distinct. So the expert advice that the different regulatory bodies provided had us focus on making the modeling and analysis plan a little bit different. The data cuts are different. And specifically for the EMA application, that has additional validation within specifically European populations. So this is, I think, really illustrative of how we really do need to have a global approach, and having the validation of this clinical trial simulation tool in European populations will be fundamental for sponsors who are having their enrollments and sites globally. And I also just wanted to point out, because I failed to mention in my brief snapshot earlier on our Duchenne programs within the Duchenne Regulatory Science Consortium, that that we are also pursuing the regulatory pathways for the GLDH qualification through EMA, FDA, and PDMA. So it really is a global and concerted effort, and I think demonstrates the importance of harmonizing the data to make the approach truly bespoke and global.
Thanks, Doreen. I think it's important for Duchenne, but it is also a very nice model how c-path can work within the disease with don't misunderstand me, Dimitrios, but a relatively slow progression. I know it's too fast for the patients, but it still is a relatively slow progression when it comes to documenting efficacy, and you want effective drugs. So I think it's a very good example. Cecile, anything you'd like to add more from a general c-path perspective before I go into my more detailed questions?
Yes, thank you, Thomas, for this question. I think also from my experience and perspective, and I would like to add also to what Irina has said. I mean, another example where we really engage beyond EU and US was also pulmonary arterial hypertension. And I know we have Agnes Klein from Health Canada here also. So it's good to see that there is interest in other regions in developing these activities. And I see the added value of c-path, because in these moments where we manage, and probably Dimitrios remember, like in these moments where you really manage to engage the communities in the different regions, like key opinion leaders, patient representative, industry, regulators, and you address many of the bottlenecks, you agree on what are the strategy and lines to take and how to make things progressing, then there is no available infrastructure that can take over and allow to get everybody back into what they know to do best, or concentrate on their families, or concentrate on their patients. They need to learn regulatory science, data science, pharmacometrics, and how to carry on with this project. And I believe to have an infrastructure like c-path that allows to have these core competencies already laid out, and like a scientific and technical secretariat that allow the communities to bring their problems to this to the infrastructure and really focus on the content and remove some of the burdens if you really want to implement some of the outcome when you have agreed across the region and stakeholders on how to move forward. can truly help to accelerate development in some of these areas with unmet needs. Thank you.
Thanks, Cecile. So let's get into a little bit more details in these different aspects. We've got the long duration of trials, the need for different data sources, the biomarker qualification, the way we capture endpoints, the relevance to patients, etc. And let's start with the long duration of trials and life cycle concept. And if we start with you, Ralph, from your perspective, you have the legal tools in terms of bias, conditional, and various ways of stimulating this. How can we make this happen even better in practice? How can we prepare for data generation for a gene therapy within existing registries early, not at the time of an application for an MIA, but early, so the system, the healthcare system, the other stakeholders are fully prepared that this, to understand the duration of effect of a gene therapy, this is something that we will have to continue post the initial approval. So what's your perspective, Ralph?
Thanks, Thomas, and thanks for giving me a quite easy question.
Who told you? Did they invite you to say I would only ask easy questions? Someone lied, Ralph, sorry.
No, I think it's the reverse of the CPath colleagues articulating that they are addressing unmet needs. So that this is the relevant question. And long studies, long clinical trials needed means for me that there isn't a way yet that has been found to have shorter trials, to have more the same type of evidence from shorter trials. And that can have a number of reasons. And let me just think about this briefly. The elements that are in there are related to, for example, understanding the meaningfulness of the endpoints for which such a trial is designed. And I'm saying that because there is not just a single stakeholder who defines the value, but we need to ask and work with the stakeholders. We need foremostly also ask the patients and affected persons. This is why in some of the regulatory science strategies, you find the idea to have patient preference studies, patient-reported outcomes. These are big topic areas that are there to understand, as I said, endpoints, how studies can be designed, and a number of main parameters, choices that patients would make between different medicines. So an additional element is that we also may want to come to more quantitative benefit risk decision-making tools. And I think in our regulatory science research needs, we have one topic on multi-criteria decision analysis, and progress on this frontier at the other end of preferences and endpoints then in the decision making will also be very helpful. And in between that, we have, as you said, the tools where it is about decision making for different purposes, for changing the dose, for the next trial, for maybe a conditional marketing authorization, then for reimbursement if that's necessary, and then eventually also for changing clinical care guidelines. So from my personal perspective, again, it's quite personal. I would look at this from A to Z and then see how these elements that I mentioned can be developed together. And for that, at least, we have also in our strategy to work together with so-called downstream decision makers, but at the same time, the work with patient and patient communities, as mentioned as well. So we hope that this accelerates these discussions, that we put ourselves a little bit into the middle, but we can't be alone in this spot. So we need others to join us and carry the work forward.
But I think that's a very good answer, and you're pointing to the fact that maybe the regulators are are the ones where we do have established methods to agree development plans through scientific advice, etc. But no patient benefit from having a regulatory approval if it doesn't reach the market for other reasons. And of course that's true regardless if we talk about the SMA and the conversation around a certain product there, or a future an Alzheimer product. So of course we need to have the HTA and payers involved into these discussions, and I'll come back to that question later on. But moving to you, Lada, and asking perhaps an equally provocative question. Is there a sort of reluctance within industry to fully embrace the life cycle perspective, and is it still a focus on the initial approval and then it's over to commercialization that sort of almost hindered this development? I hope the answer is just no, but over to you.
Well, I also would say no, and hopefully we're changing the way we're doing things, Thomas. And also to Ralph, to your invitation, I would say we will gladly partner with you there on what you said. I think it's a great point that you raised. So Thomas, on the question that you raised, so the answer is hopefully that we're moving towards a no, and that we have tools, right, to make drug development more efficient. We have tools that we can use to look throughout the whole life cycle on how we can make each of these steps more efficient, always without compromising on scientific validity, patient safety, and data quality, of course. What I would say is that, well, we need to develop some new tools as well, but we need to change status quo of drug development, and we need to start using the tools that we have. We need to start looking at every step of that development. Where can we use those innovative clinical trial designs? Where can we use alternatives to the preclinical animal models that we have? Where can we use different data sources from the ones that we have been using until now? And I think that's the key one, is how do we change the status quo on how we are developing drugs? How do we look at the context of the drug that we're developing, at the drug itself, at the patient population, at the scientific question that we need to answer, and how do we choose the right method for all of that? And we have a beautiful example where we developed a very successful drug with smart risk-taking that went from first in human to marketing authorization application in 4 years. And that was because an adaptive design was taken where we could move from exploratory to confirmatory. So I would say we need more of these examples where we're actually using the tools that we have, and then we need collaboration platforms to develop new tools that we also need for all of the other parts of the life cycle approach.
That's good, thanks. Franz, from an academic perspective, you've heard these comments. You talked about involvement previously. Do you have any additional thoughts on how to involve academia in these discussions?
So thanks. I hope you can hear me now, because I'm, even after 2 years of locked, not able to handle my technique properly. So, I mean, as you mentioned in the beginning, Thomas, new methodologies are really, in most of the cases, developed at academia and also applied in the academic settings, but people are not aware of it. Like take adaptive designs, which were really considered as utility of German-speaking countries. It took some time until industry and even longer until regulators accepted the usefulness in drug development. So when new research codes are developed, it would be good not only to involve industry or regulatory experts, but also key opinion leaders in academia. And in this respect, regulatory initiatives might be always one step behind and only have topics in the list, which was mentioned by Ralph, which have been already around for quite a while. So I think we need a kind of early talent or topic scouting, like in football or soccer in the US, and take up relevant topics earlier and don't wait for years. So it's not only about executing projects and looking for success stories like Lada mentioned it, but also defining them in the first place. And as Lada said, people are not aware of which tools are already available. So an important point is the sustainability and visibility of already available results. We have very, very nice research projects going on in Europe and also in the US, but having the results finally on the project web page or at the university website might not be sufficient for a broader uptake. And I think here CPath would be of great help when providing a platform where results can be presented and promoted, as the name CPath has already quite a good standing. It's like a kind of quality stamp. If something is promoted there, people know that you can really build on this output already. This would be nice to enhance academic research. I mentioned before, a more active involvement in the ICH project process would be also nice. And last but not least, I still think it's quite difficult for young researchers to get in contact with regulatory topics. And most of the cases, it only works if the supervisors have a personal interest in such topics, but there's not it's not on the curriculum level. Take, for example, in statistics, for some mathematicians, only the poor maths, it's what's counted, it's not whether it could be applied or not. And there's still not such a thing like a harmonized joint curriculum on quantitative decision-making in drug development here in Europe, is on a master level or on a PhD level. So it was really great to hear in the beginning that CPath is already involved in a regulatory science graduate certificate in the US. And I think it would be good to develop a joint curriculum on a PhD level here in Europe, because I think it would make the life of us, but also the life of the next generation of researchers much easier.
Thanks, Franz. Demetrius and Ralph. Demetrius, I'm going to ask this more as a regulator, given your experience with PDCO, and Ralph as well. And it's linked to a question that we received through the chat. This discussion often becomes a randomized controlled trial versus something else, a single arm study with an external control group, etc. And I find that a frustrating conversation, an unnecessary conversation, because, at least in my mind, few patients would be prepared to sign up to a 5-year placebo-controlled study within the Duchenne area, for example. In many cases, it's not a matter of replacing. It is perhaps the only way to generate data is through a single-arm trial through external control data. And I'm a randomized control trial person by heart, but I'm also convinced that we need to look at different designs to address the questions, because we cannot do it. How do we get out of that randomized control versus other design conversations? And I'm sure there must be loads of them at the PDCO and at the EMA.
Thank you, Thomas. I have to acknowledge that we have been together in your previous had too many frustrating discussions about the topic, right? So I'm not going to pick it up from there. But I mean, sometimes even in areas where you are not the rarest, for example, of rare disease like Duchenne, basically we're running out of children. That's the reality. We don't have any more patients. This fantastic group of 3 to 5 or 3 to 7 that you can do 10 biopsies and throw them in the clinical trials. That's the reality. And I think that's why our PPMD, our let's say patient group in US supported the master protocol and initiated adaptive models, let's say, on drug development. So obviously we need different models, and we have seen also, and I'm echoing what you said about SMA, that even in Europe, Thomas, we have stuck with the idea of the drug registries, these nightmares, let's say, that are not sustainable also in the HTA level, in the reimbursement level. So we have to turn our direction towards disease registries. And I'm talking disease registries, and I'm looking at Cecile, that include US data, that answers the same questions. I mean, obviously we have two different systems in US and Europe and in other regions. We have different requirements, but I think, and Ralph would agree on that, all the efforts we did, with the joint HTA, FDA, EMA, it's a good start, but at the end, you don't have access. And sometimes you have, this postcode access. So if you're living in the roadside of the border, oops, sorry, you die. Which, okay, I can live with it to a level, but not for very long. So the one is the way, as Lada said, on how do we view the drug development? So do we view it in a spotlight, on a snapshot, or do we view it and we include, for example, what Frank said, researchers? And actually, Frank, I will say that you can include also patients in your research, because first they will finance you and then they will involve you in the regulatory environment, just to think, outside the box. This is what we learn in Tucson. And the second is that we have to have the correct questions that will answer, for example, in Europe, the HTA questions, Thomas, in the later stage, because we look at very in a silo. Yes, we answered Ralph's questions. Fantastic. We have access. Great. We have approval. We don't have access. So we have to collect what we need from the early start. We have to do it in a continuum. There is no trials on gene therapies on, I don't know, 2 years. There are no trials in 2 years or 3 years. In rare disease is unacceptable. But what you can do is you can do the trials. You can monitor these people, but you have to be able to monitor with various components, from the very early to the very stage. And this is also covering reimbursement. I mean, that's the reality. And this is the data also we're looking in the PDCO, and we cannot get it. So there, I think there is a key role that together with us, with all the stakeholders, CPath can play.
Yeah, good. Ralph, do you want to add anything? And I know we're running out of time, so if you want to say something about not only the design but qualification of endpoints and as we presented earlier, digital tools to capture endpoints. How do we facilitate? Is qualification opinion the only way, or do we need to find other ways of getting regulatory agreements or acceptance of this?
Yes, Thomas. Do you permit me to first also come back to the RCT question?
Oh, yes.
So I join your frustration, but I don't think it's unnecessary to talk about RCT versus other approaches. I think it's totally necessary to have these discussions on how to design clinical research with patients, with parents, with the community, and so on. And we get proposals still nowadays here at the agency where, again, I speak from personal perspective only, but where proposals are depicting the lack of ethical acceptability of placebo as if it would be given without standard of care. And the proposals are really not picking up where the discussion is. So the discussion is much more nuanced. It's about how long, for whom, what else, and so on. So it's really important to understand that the discussion about clinical trials is moving on. And a very good example of this is now our discussion about platform trials, complex clinical trials. And that really has triggered to again look at the various challenges that are included. So what are the right controls, which type of controls, how to adapt within the trial, how to combine data, and so on. So I keep this short, but I really hope that this triggering by the platform trials will lead us to also rethink less complex trials, let's say. I have to say that this is a hope because, for example, Bayesian approaches have been often seen by European regulators of clinical trials, but it hasn't really moved the needle that they saw it. We haven't seen many applications here for regulatory submissions, and I wish this would be coming more. And a last point on that is that there is still often insufficient methodology used. Just the other day in a publication of clinical prediction models in oncology, most of these models were described by the academic researchers as unsatisfactory. And now you could say that maybe this is just a snapshot of the past, but here again, I think we are on the same boat that such clinical prediction models are important for the community, for patients, for physicians, for regulators and developers. So we really need to think about good approaches for that. So, and yes, on the qualifications, perhaps the interesting news is that a focal group is looking at how future qualification procedures can be run. We need to have further discussions with all stakeholders around this. And I was really intrigued, Franz, when I heard, I think almost I heard your suggestion we could outsource the qualification to CPath. So maybe that's an element where we can discuss what's the work sharing on qualifications between the various stakeholders.
I didn't mean to outsource it. So sorry, Ralph.
No, no.
I thought this would be a good proposal, and we can take it as a starting point.
But Ralph, I take your point, and I was exaggerating, except that we need to have this conversation. Which tool is the best one to address the research question? I totally agree with you when it comes to design, and so that this is a very, very important comment from your side. Now, Klaus, you'll get the last question. When you now have heard all this, and based on your experience with working with the FDA and other stakeholders in the US, what's your reflections? And you'll only get 1 minute, but what's your reflections on the CPath role in facilitating this in Europe?
Okay, 1 minute for that question. Thanks, Tomas. So in reflecting everything that we discussed, I'm going to try to use an analogy. If you're going to try to have something driven through a wall, you need to understand the nature of the wall, and you need to understand the nature of the tools you need to do that. If the wall is made of wood, all you would need are some nails and a hammer. That's it. But if the wall is made of granite, you would need some sophisticated power tools with some drill bits and screws. That does not mean that it's an either or that you would do overkill and use a power drill that through a wooden wall that would destroy the wall, or try to nail nails with a hammer on a granite wall. You just need to understand the context of what kind of tools you need to address the need that you have. And so that's the whole conversation about the evidential considerations for what. A lot of times people say, oh, all our answers lie in a PRO measure. All our answers lie in a surrogate marker. All our answers lie in not doing a randomized clinical trial. Well, hold on a second. We need to, as clinicians do, we need to listen to the patient, and we need to understand exactly how to establish a diagnosis of what the problem is before we devise a treatment plan. With these unmet needs in drug development, we need to do the same. And that's what we can bring to the table. Listen to all the stakeholders and understand their perspective, and then build a clear diagnosis of what the unmet needs truly are, so that then the solutions can be triggered to address those unmet needs. And sometimes it'll be a surrogate marker, sometimes it'll be a PRO measure, but not always. There are a whole suite of solutions that can address unmet needs, but you need to understand exactly what the unmet need is. And to do that, you need to listen to every single angle of the stakeholders that are involved in the unmet need. So that's where I would leave it in terms of the reflection and the notion of how we need multiple data types, multiple data sources, platforms to look at those different data types, but really understand what kind of unmet need do you have and what kind of solution you need to drive to address it. That's where I.
Thanks, Klaus, and I like your parallel to taking down a wall, of course, and how to do it. We need an agreement that we have a joint approach how to do it. We also have to understand the tools, the strengths, which one to use when, And I think this is where CPath has a real opportunity to clarify the value of various tools in different situations. In the end, we need some brave people, various stakeholders, to agree that this is the way we're going to attack the wall, and we almost have to learn through these case studies. But to make people brave, to empower them, we need to understand the tools better, and this is really where I see CPath coming in. Sorry if trying to use this parallel to taking down the wall too far, but I think it to some extent illustrates what we tried to discuss and the message we tried to convey. Cecile, we're 4 or 5 minutes late for your so it's time for your wrap up, but I hope you excuse us for being a bit late.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you all the panelists for sharing your views and experience in these next steps that CPath is aiming at around global collaboration. And thank you, Thomas, for chairing the panel, asking the difficult questions as well, which was important. We could not address all the questions that are in the Q&A box, but we can answer some of these questions in writing following the meeting. You can also reach out to us anytime. I think to conclude today's webinar, there are a few points I would like to highlight. First of all, 3 key points we heard during the case studies, the presentations, and the panel. And the first one is about what can we learn from the 15 years of experience of CPath in the US in bringing these new tools to development, and as well to integrate them into drug development at product level. I think I heard a lot about the possibility, and I agree with what Agnes Klein was saying in the chat, and as well Klaus, when we peel the layer, actually regulators are more aligned than we think. We just need to pay attention to regional differences, respect the background and the different requirements that comes from the different perspective. I remember from the extrapolation discussion around safety and extrapolation of safety and aspects that were actually included in US law, and preventing them from wording some aspects related to extrapolation way, safety in certain way, and we had to respect that and work around that in order to make sure that all the different aspects can be truly coming to consensus and collaboration. And in order to achieve that, you really need to build trust into the different system and the different stakeholders and regions. You need funding. We heard like you need resources in order to provide this infrastructure and secretariat, scientific secretariat. You need to change practice around data, promote data sharing, and it's all back to this trust. We also heard roles and expectation that we can have from the different stakeholders. I think academia is really, as Franz mentioned, like is the starting point to innovation, and we need to be able to offer to academic researcher some help and in order to allow them to bring this innovation as being fit for regulatory purposes from the beginning, and reduce the barrier to have this innovation reaching industry, patient, and regulators. We also, I completely agree with what Ralph Herold has said, which is about the need to increase interdisciplinary collaboration more than ever. Definitely, as tools, technology are developing, we need to better understand beyond our own respective area of expertise how and where others are coming from, and what can we learn from each other across disciplines and stakeholders and region. The education and training is also going to be key, because once we have tools, if nobody knows where to find them or to use them, I guess it's a nice paper on a website, and that ends there. And finally, I think that it's important to have tools that are fit for regulatory purposes, but it's also important to have regulatory pathways that are fit for purpose. And it's important to have the right, as Klaus mentioned, the right tools for the right context. And sometimes qualification is quite an engagement over the years and an investment. And maybe there are other ways to generate regulatory tools that can make it more accessible and develop regulatory precedents that can be leveraged in other areas. So to conclude, I think the 3 key points we can take from this webinar is that CPath is really aiming at facilitating global collaboration, and in order to have a timely global compatibility on drug development tools and methodologies, collaboration is going to be key, and I think we heard it from everybody. It is important to have regional multi-stakeholders platform in order to build regional voice that is going to take into account requirements and regional culture and differences in order to develop the consensus. And to do so, you need to have regional funding. We understand that behind US funding and EU funding, there are rules to be followed, which are fair, and we need to respect, and we need to work around that. And this is with all of this in mind that CPath is really committed as a neutral convener to move this regulatory science forward, and will focus for the next years on developing such global platform in areas with great impact for the patients as a priority. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. I think this concludes the webinar. Thank you for staying 1 minute longer. But thanks, everybody. We had a great time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.